The dangers journalists face here and across the country as they report in the streets how they stand up to protect one another. What's behind the COVID-19 outbreak at San Diego State and what it means for all of us. And an aerial ballet to behold behind the scenes in the air war against California wildfires. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now.
¿Qué onda, friends? In this edition of Port of Entry, we are telling the story of Charles and Giancarlo, two compadres who recently put together a graphic novel titled The Fracture. Along with this podcast episode, we are premiering Port of Entry shorts, small video capsules of the stories we put together, and we have two to share. Catch us wherever you get your podcasts. Nos vemos pronto!
Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me on this remote version of the KPBS Roundtable today, reporter John Wilkins of the San Diego Union-Tribune, Matt Hall, editorial and opinion director for the Union-Tribune, and Brendan Tuccinardi, editor-in-chief for the student newspaper, The Daily Aztec. Telling the story of 2020 hasn't been easy. Journalists are covering a highly polarized election, clashing with law enforcement, and trying to overcome misinformation campaigns. And of course, all of this during a pandemic that's led to even more job cuts in the industry and most people working from home. Here to take a step back and discuss it all is Matthew Hall, editorial and opinion director for the San Diego Union-Tribune, and of this month, the new president-elect of the Society of Professional Journalists. Matt, welcome back to the Roundtable.
Great to be here. Or be there. I don't know. I lose my sense of place now.
We are. It's a remote world, is it not? Well, let's start with your new role. For those who don't follow the industry, what is the Society of Professional Journalists, and what's your top goal as you prepare to lead this national organization?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I mean, SBJ is an organization that has been around since 1909. So it has a long history. I'm the 104th president. There's 103 whose shoulders I stand on in this role. And we're a national advocacy group. You know, we celebrate journalism, we advocate for journalists, and we hold the powerful to account, right? So we're advocating for things like audio at the Supreme Court, at their hearings, helping PIOs do a better job at giving information out, especially in this pandemic, you know, and we're A to Z. We're a shop that helps do a lot of things for journalism. As president, my big goal this year, I guess there's a couple that I want to do. I think this is a moment where journalists need to look internally at their shops, at their outlets, and make sure that they reflect their communities. Diversity and inclusion has always been important, but in this moment, that's something that I really want to bring to the fore. And I also want to reach out to our campus chapters and our young journalists. Like before I was sworn in, I said on Twitter, look, I'm getting sworn in as president of this group, and I'm really excited about it. I want to pay it forward. If there's 10 people out there who want to go to our convention, I'll pay for their convention costs. And within 48 hours, 10 journalists had raised their hand, mostly women, mostly journalists of color. And so I sponsored their conferences, and afterwards they all said it was amazing. So this is also a time for journalists to help other journalists, younger journalists especially.
Wow, I'll raise my hand. You can fly me first class. I'll get a nice hotel suite. Well, I'll tell you what, we don't have time today to cover all the challenges in the media, but in recent days we've seen clear examples. Let's start with the incident last weekend in Compton, just north of here, where Josie Huang, a LA-based public media reporter, she was violently attacked and arrested while covering the shooting of two sheriff's deputies up there. How does an organization like SPJ advocate broadly for media rights, stand up for reporters in an incident like this one?
Yeah, I was actually online when the first video of that incident came in. And so I personally started tweeting at LA county sheriffs saying, you know, we need a better explanation. Obviously, that situation was unfolding quickly. What happened to those deputies was horrific, but that's no excuse to throw a journalist around like a rag doll. She was whipped against a car and thrown on the ground, and 5 deputies were on top of her. All the while, as you just said, she was saying, I'm a journalist. KPCC, I think she mentioned the organization about 8 times. You know, we're here to support her. We're here to say that that is wrong and that the sheriffs need to be held accountable. And we're here to stand up for all journalists. You know, law enforcement has a job to do. We respect that. We understand that, but we have a job to do as well.
Well, it's good SBJ is there for that because these days, and of course, at any time, the First Amendment is so critical. And we've seen a lot of this during protests over the summer. Is there concern of a trend toward law enforcement disregarding First Amendment rights when it comes to the media?
I don't know if it's a trend. I mean, this has always been a point of friction. I mean, the two of us have different jobs. I think what's happening now is you're actually seeing a reckoning in media that the default story in an issue involving police should not be the police version. I think partly that should have always been the case, but partly police departments have invited that on themselves. And that trust is an issue not only for the media. We've made some major self-inflicted wounds, and we need to account for that. We need to correct our mistakes when they happen. But law enforcement has done that as well. And so now when you have an incident, journalists need to not just take the police view as the default, but hold up everyone equally and make sure we get to the heart of the matter and the truth of the matter.
Now, we're less than 50 days from this election, which certainly is an underlying current to everything we're talking about here. 2016 was the year of misinformation online. It shaped the opinion of a lot of voters. And this week we saw a one-day boycott of Facebook, heavily criticized for not doing enough to rein it in. How big of a challenge is misinformation and trust when it comes to having an informed public and a healthy democracy?
Oh, it's huge. I went virtually and gave a presentation on fake news, real problem for an 8th grade humanities class at Golden Hill.
Good.
This is an important thing that journalists need to realize. It was a huge problem in 2016. It's only worse now. Journalists need to be aware of this, and the public needs to be aware of this. And it's not just misinformation this year. I think an important point that needs to be made is that with the pandemic and voting happening in many places, largely by mail, that means there is no such thing as election day. That's a misnomer. It's a month to vote, and it could be weeks to count the votes. And so journalists need to do a better job of explaining that to the public, explaining that you'll be getting a mail ballot 30 days before the election and that you need to take that seriously. And the mail delivery will be fine, but we all know that the mail delivery is a little slow right now. So if you really want to get your vote counted, maybe vote early and maybe even take it to one of these places where you can drop it off through the county registrar's system.
I think that's a critical point, especially when President Trump and the Attorney General Bill Barr, frankly, are trying to cast aspersions on mail-in balloting and claiming it's fraudulent when it isn't, and we need to point that out.
No evidence of that. No widespread fraud in any shape or fashion. And in fact, there are whole states that do it and have done it successfully.
Yeah, and polls today say a lot of Republicans, unfortunately, are believing there is, and it's a real problem, and it's up to us to cover that going forward. Well, the misinformation theme, it's, of course, part of this pandemic that we're dealing with. What do you hear from journalists about audience that refuse to believe facts and science?
It's a problem. It's a problem. And I think there, again, you just need to do your job and you do the work and push back. Like at that class that I was at, a bunch of 8th graders in a chat, in a Zoom call, you can imagine that it wasn't all serious, that they're making some quips in there. And one of them said, "It's okay, COVID isn't real." And I stopped my presentation. Like, wait, no. You need to understand that COVID-19 is real, that 200,000 Americans have died, that multiple factors more are going to have potentially long-term health implications for heart and lungs, et cetera. And so this is a real situation here. Young people may not have the same risk in terms of potential loss of life as certainly older folks. But as we saw from San Diego State, it only takes a few people making bad decisions to really cause problems for our community.
Yeah, a ripple effect throughout San Diego. Now, COVID-19 also brought the worst economic crisis in our lifetimes. How's the pandemic shaking up newsrooms, many of which were already being cut to the bone before this happened?
Yeah, it's been brutal. I mean, I'll be honest, it's been tough at the Union Tribune. We had across the board furloughs. But we kept working through it. We've been for 6 months putting out a newspaper at home. I think I've been in the office 2 or 3 times in that span, and it's weird to go into a ghost building. I kind of don't know if we'll ever go back. But the Union Tribune is here to put out the news. KPBS is here to put out the news. Voice of San Diego and the television stations are here to put out the news. And they're doing it in very difficult situations, either from home or going out on the streets to cover pandemic-related events or protests, wearing masks, taking care of themselves. But it's hard. It's hard, man. The mental toll is difficult.
Well, it is, and we have to remember, as we all know, you and I have been in newsrooms for a lot of years. It's a collaborative effort. You feed off the energy of each other, and it's tough to do it as individuals. And there's a personal toll to covering the news, especially in 2020. What do you hear from your colleagues remotely at the UT and elsewhere about burnout and the weight of these challenges?
Huge issue. I mean, I referenced the conference that we just had this past weekend at SBJ. One of the panels involved a Southern Californian, Dr. Tammy McCoy Arabayo, who's a therapist who works with first responders and has helped people in really troubling emotional times. And she said it's okay to realize that it's not okay right now. So and also to take a break. If you can take a day, take a day. If you can take half a day, take half a day. The problem for us in the news business is that many of us are plugged into it, 6 a.m. to midnight, sometimes past midnight. So, there are many days where I personally I'm not getting a lot of sleep. I know a lot of my colleagues are putting out podcasts under blankets and in closets, working from home with when there's an occasional Wi-Fi outage. It's difficult. And we can't get together for a beer and complain about it, But I think, my team is doing amazing work. My peers at the UT and around San Diego and the country are doing incredible work in difficult times. And I'm just grateful for their work. We're kind of first responders in a way too, not to compare us to some of these other, frontline workers that are doing incredible work, from grocery workers to police officers and firefighters. But the news business has taken some blows during this, but is really trying to get the real dope, straight information to people at an important time.
Well, and absolutely is critical, and it's important for SBJ to be there and pushing all of this and protecting everybody's First Amendment rights and our democracy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I often say a free press isn't free. Journalism costs money, but less journalism costs society. And that means that this isn't a time for us to be asking people to pay for subscriptions. It's a time for us to be explaining to them that they are members. Like KPBS model, the Voice of San Diego model, those are good models because they're building memberships and communities. And I think all news outlets need to be doing that. That's the way forward here, is that we're in this together. You help local news outlets, you help your community.
Yeah, we're all going to have to be vigilant in the business, and of course, just as citizens, because it's such a fraught time for our country and our democracy. I've been speaking with Matthew Hall, president-elect of the Society of Professional Journalists. He's also editorial and opinion director of the San Diego Union-Tribune. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
San Diego is at risk of taking a step back in its COVID-19 journey. Key metrics are slipping, and part of it is due to the scene at SDSU. Hundreds of cases in recent weeks, and now an order that all students get tested. This is becoming political, with local leaders wondering if those numbers should be excluded from the county's overall picture, an idea flatly rejected by Governor Newsom. Joining us with some insight into the mood on campus is Brendan Tuccinardi, editor-in-chief for the student newspaper, The Daily Aztec. Welcome to the Roundtable.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, as of this recording, there are more than 700 COVID-19 cases among the campus community since school resumed a few weeks ago. Older San Diegans, people like me, are scratching our heads saying, these are college students. Why aren't they smart enough to understand the risk to themselves and to everyone and wear masks and socially distance? What's going on campus from your perspective?
I think things have definitely improved since the start of the semester. The stay-at-home order, the advisory for the college area, and the neighborhood patrols SCSU is doing has definitely changed students' attitudes towards staying safe and staying inside. I think the first 2 weeks of the semester were probably the worst in terms of students disregarding public health guidance. I witnessed a lot of parties, large gatherings. You would see, during a typical semester, you would see large, herds of students walking on College Avenue. And we were seeing the same thing the first weekend. And so I'm not necessarily surprised, but I think things are definitely getting better.
So it sounds like the message is getting through after this outbreak and all the publicity. You think peer pressure is involved? Do you hear people saying, hey, we need to distance, wear the mask?
Yeah, I think for sure students are definitely keeping each other more accountable these days. I think just the possibility of facing discipline through the university has really changed the attitude off campus, especially. And then on campus, just the signage everywhere, students wearing masks definitely sends the message that the rules need to be followed.
And your latest byline is on this push by some to blame San Diego State as an isolated cluster that shouldn't be counted in the county's overall metrics. We've talked about that here on KPBS, and the county supervisors are involved even as we're talking here and meeting and seeing what they're going to do with state officials. Well, how does it feel to have political leaders essentially saying SDSU shouldn't count as part of our community?
Honestly, pretty disappointing. You see a lot of local politicians tout SDSU as this great economic engine, which undoubtedly it is, but as soon as it becomes inconvenient for them, they kind of jump ship. I think what they aren't considering is how this makes students feel. These past few days, we've seen that SDSU's hands are essentially tied when it comes to how far they can go to control students living off campus. This push to exclude SDSU cases isn't giving students many reasons to trust the county when it's the county that really needs to step up and take responsibility.
And of course, you're writing stories about this. Are you getting much response, people talking about it or responding online to what you're writing in the paper?
We've got a couple comments on my most recent article, and it's mostly alumni and business leaders saying that the county is right in what they're doing because SDSU students aren't at risk of being hospitalized or straining the healthcare system, that these cases shouldn't count.
Well, it's interesting, though, because, of course, we're all part of the same community, and there's a ripple effect. The UT today, for example, had a story about businesses near campus being a little wary of students who might come in and they might be asymptomatic carriers. Did you see that story? Are you aware of that sentiment?
I think it's very well founded, but the data doesn't necessarily suggest that. Dr. Eric McDonald, the county health officer, said that the likelihood that students are asymptomatic is pretty low. I think it was at 11% yesterday's press conference. And I think this push by the university to mandate testing for all campus residents will give us a better picture of whether that is true if students are asymptomatic.
Right. Now, I wanted to ask about that, the mandatory testing for those who live on campus. How is that going so far?
I think it's going pretty well. I was on campus today actually talking to students after they got tested, and they were generally pretty receptive. They thought it was a good idea. The main criticism they had was that they feel like it was a bit too late on SDSU's part to mandate testing.
Right. It's not going to help what's happened so far, and we'll just hope things turn around and it gets better going forward. Now, KPBS has reported on how the pandemic has upended the traditional college experience, the mental toll that it takes on students. What about you? How's this changed your time at San Diego State University?
It's definitely turned it upside down. I'm a senior, so this is definitely not the year I had imagined for myself. It's really been getting me through the challenges and kind of this struggle of doing online classes and this distance learning is kind of the idea in the back of my head that eventually we'll all get to the other side of this pandemic. And at the end, we'll be stronger for it.
Now, your role at the Daily Aztec as a leader and editor-in-chief, how have you and your team there adapted in recent months? Still got to report the news.
We've definitely taken it in stride. I've tried to make sure that my team understands that this is a really good opportunity for growth. We focus more on our digital presence, and also it's a really great learning experience. Reporting on breaking news, having to do data reporting has been really interesting for myself to learn, but also being with my colleagues, learning it at the same time. We've really built this great network despite being completely virtual and remote.
Well, plus you're performing a public service in the midst of a public health crisis. That's got to be gratifying, right?
Yeah, that definitely is. I think oftentimes a lot of people discount student journalists and student media as just being kind of learning and not necessarily in the thick of it. But these past few weeks, the Daily Aztec has definitely, in my opinion, shown that we're here, and we're definitely here as a true trustworthy source for students, but also the community, because at the end of the day, no one knows SDSU like we do because we're living it.
Well, I certainly remember how vital my newspaper was at Michigan State University when I was taking journalism there way back in the 17th century. So I know how important it is to students and to faculty and everybody on campus to be reading it, and I know it's got to be gratifying to you to produce the paper every day. I've been speaking with Brendan Tuccinardi, editor-in-chief for the Daily Aztec. Thanks very much, Brendan.
Yeah, thank you.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
As in any war, the populace fleeing a California wildfire cheers when the cavalry arrives. Firefighters on the ground are showered in everlasting gratitude by residents whose houses are saved by crews attacking flames with high-pressure hoses and bulldozers and pickaxes and shovels. But what really sets hearts and camera shutters aflutter is aerial bombardment. The story behind the iconic imagery of aircraft dropping water and retardant, though, is complex. And joining me is the reporter whose narrative in the San Diego Union-Tribune this week explained just why. John Wilkins, welcome back to the Roundtable.
Thanks, Mark. Happy to be here.
Well, John, start with a 60-second retrospective. You write that the aerial assaults on wildfires started way back in the 1930s, and it's gotten ever more sophisticated in recent years, right?
Well, sure. In the early days, it involved filling beer kegs with water, kicking them out an open door, and kind of praying that they would land on the fire and do something. Then we had a bunch of surplus of airplanes after World War II, so they started using those to try to fight fire as well. It was in the early days just water, and they found water pretty much evaporated when they tried to drop it on the fire from above. So they've gotten, of course, ever increasingly sophisticated with this now, and they're using nimble helicopters, they're using 747s, they're using those sky cranes that have the nozzles that suck water out of lakes. So it's a very sophisticated operation now.
We learned a lot here from mistakes that were made in 2003 and 2007. We had terrible wildfires that year. They claimed more than a dozen lives, thousands of homes in San Diego County, but those lessons were put to work in the meantime, right?
Well, as often with bureaucracies, it takes a long time for things to take hold. If we remember the Cedar Fire in 2003, there was a sheriff's helicopter that was ready to drop some water on it. It was very small late in the afternoon, but he was ordered back because there was a rule against flying anytime when it got close to sunset. So he was not allowed to fly on that fire. It got really big overnight and, of course, took off and claimed all those lives that you mentioned. 2007, a similar scenario, CAL FIRE got criticized because they were slow to get the helicopters in the air, especially at night, to try and tackle that fire.
But fighting these fires by air is ever more expensive as well. How expensive are we talking about?
Oh boy, well, it's the city unveiled a new helicopter last December that's about $20 million that will fly at night. It joins two other helicopters that they have that sit in a hangar that's $13-14 million too. SDG&E spends about $10 million a year now contracting two firefighting helicopters to be here year round. And of course, when you start calling in DC-10s, 747s from Sacramento area, having them refuel for retardant in San Bernardino, those planes thousands of dollars an hour to fly. So it gets very expensive very fast.
And aircraft were a big help in the Valley fire here in the past week or so, and that plus a break in the weather stopped what could have been much worse in that fire, which was just south of Alpine, right?
Yeah, southeast of Alpine. Yeah, we lost about 30 homes, maybe about 50 or 60 structures in all. But there are hundreds of structures in that area, and it could have been much worse. The weather and the initial onslaught from the air helped knock that one back. But I think everybody thinks, that we got pretty lucky that time. But, you buy your own luck, as I said in that story. And the county and the various agencies around town have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in fire prevention and suppression over the years to try to put themselves in a position where when they need to call resources quickly, they're here.
And as you noted in your story, people love seeing the planes and helicopters swoop in to douse the flames, but you quote fire officials as saying aircraft alone never put out a fire. What do they mean by that?
Well, especially a big fire, you have to have the crews on the ground. Retardant is put out ahead of the fire. And if you don't have the crews on the ground close enough to move in after a load is dropped to sort of cut the containment line with bulldozers and chainsaws and shovels, the flames will just jump beyond it. So you have to have that coordinated effort with the crews on the ground and in the air. What they like about using the aerial bombardment early now is it buys them time to get all those other crews on the ground. I think at the peak of the Valley Fire, they had probably close to 100 engines in the various nooks and crannies of that area, protecting houses and cutting fire line.
And I wanted to turn to climate change as a factor in these big fires raging in California, Oregon, and Washington state this month. Your story included a 2015 report by the U.S. Forest Service addressing the impact of climate change. What were the conclusions there?
Well, the big one that jumped out at me is that climate change has brought fire seasons that now are on average almost 80 days longer than they were in 1970. So, climate change, hotter temperatures, drier brush. It just sort of loads the dice for a fire now.
Yeah, and that was a shocking report, and yet there still seems to be some controversy, at least in the national level, in the political aspects of a certain party here. President Trump got into it this week with California leaders, including the California Secretary for Natural Resources and Governor Gavin Newsom, and they were restrained but firm, since a lot of federal dollars are on the line, but confronted with facts about record heat and dried out trees and plants and extreme wind events, Trump wasn't having it. He claims it's just going to get cooler. You watch. And that, quote, "I don't think science knows," actually. Now, you and I have covered these fires for decades now. We talked to a lot of people who have lost homes, a lot of firefighters, a lot of climate scientists. Doesn't Governor Newsom have a point when he says he respectfully has no patience left for climate change deniers in the face of such destruction?
Well, I think he does, and I haven't run into anybody who studies wildfire seriously in California and elsewhere who does not think climate change is a driving factor in what we're seeing. I mean, you've had 8 of the 10 largest fires in California history in the last decade. You've had 6 of the largest 20 happen just this year. I mean, every veteran firefighter comes back from a big fire shaking his or her head saying, "I've never seen fire behavior like this." So yes, there are other factors. We can talk about whether California and the federal government should be doing more controlled burns in the forests. I think the answer is probably yes. We should talk about whether it's smart to have people building houses where they're building them up in the wildland areas. But I don't know anybody who says climate change is not a big factor.
Well, I know one guy, he flew in on Air Force One this week, unfortunately. I think, it could be interesting to see. We've got a debate coming up later this month with Joe Biden, the Democrat, of course, and President Trump, and we'll see if the questions emerge about climate change and how they're handled by each of these candidates, and how reporters like us look at the campaigns and the platforms going forward, and the plans that are being put forth by each candidate. You think that debate is going to heat up in this particular election season?
Well, I certainly would hope that it would. I mean, you're seeing, storm surges and hurricanes in other part of the country right now. I mean, I don't know how we as a country, as a species, can talk about the future without talking about climate change.
We'll see how it all plays out between now and the November election. I've been speaking with reporter John Wilkins of the San Diego Union-Tribune. John, thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome, Mark. A pleasure as always.
That wraps up another edition of the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, John Wilkins of the San Diego Union-Tribune, Matt Hall, also with the Union-Tribune, and Brendan Tuccinardi, editor-in-chief for the student newspaper, The Daily Aztec. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for listening today, and join us again next week on The Roundtable.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.